the first of something matters, right? The first set matters. The first Topps baseball set matters. The first Prism basketball set, the first Exquisite basketball set, they matter. And here we are in 2022 making a video about all the complexities about which Pokemon card across the world was first. Welcome to another episode of The Hobby. Today, I'm really privileged to have the one and only Max City. Max, thanks for joining us today. I love that card that you got around your neck. We're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But first, I have a question for you. What is the first Pokemon set ever made?
All right. So this is a controversial topic, but the first Pokemon set ever created, ever distributed to the public was the 1996 Bandai Cardass set. That's what I've got around my neck right here. You can see this is a beautiful first Charizard of all time. This is in a PSA 9 grade. So this set is the first Pokemon card set of all time. It actually came out probably roughly about 3 weeks before the trading card game cards that everyone is a lot more familiar with.
Did they come out in? I thought it was later. So let's set this up in a way that for sure everybody understands. Like, Max is really like a Pokemon expert. He knows a lot about the history of Pokemon, and I am definitely not a Pokemon expert. So Max, as I ask you some questions today, I hope you'll forgive me if some of them seem a little bit sort of juvenile, but the main set that we all know of, the trading card game that you just described, didn't that come out in 1999, or did it come out before that?
So you are right. The first set of all time, it came out in 1999 in America. So our sets were actually three years later than the Japanese sets.
I see.
Or the set that you'll see that looks kind of like the holographics that most people are used to, the 1996 base set. These cards were first released on October 20th of 1996.
I got it. Okay, so that totally makes sense. The Japanese set predates the American set. We didn't know about it super well because we're not in Japan, because we're in America. And so I was working at a card shop at the time, and Pokemon cards from 1999, they hit the shelves, and it was like a movement we've never seen before. But prior to that, you got the Japanese set, and just a few weeks before the Japanese set, there's this set that you've got the card of that's around your neck. Can you say the name of it one more time slowly? I don't want to repeat it and say it the wrong way. What's the name of it again?
Okay, so the set name it's 1996 Bandai. Bandai is the company that actually produced the cards. Mm-hmm. So Bandai is the company, Bandai and Cardass. Cardass are machines that you would put in either 20 yen or 100 yen, twist a little knob, and then either one card would pop out or 5 cards would pop out, and that's how Cardass machines work. So that's how the first Pokemon cards were ever distributed, was through that same machine. So it's known as the 1996 Bandai Cardass. Some people call it Cardass vending sets. And they were released in the first set. They had green cards and they had red cards, and the reason that in this very first set that they had the green and the red was to correlate with the very first Game Boy games. So in the United States, what we're all aware of as our first Pokemon Game Boy games that came out was we're aware of the Pokemon Red had the Charizard on the front, and Pokemon Blue that had Blastoise on the front. So in Japan, it was a little bit different. They had the Pokemon Red, and then instead of having Blue, they had Pokemon Green. They did have a Blue that came out, I think about 10 months later, around the release of this set, but the very first sets were green and red, and that's kind of what the set is about. It is kind of playing homage to the very first Game Boy games that came out.
Super interesting. Okay, so got a few more questions on the timing here. So you said 3 weeks before. That's a very precise sort of number, right? Some people will say this card, it predates this, or it was made in the same year, but it was a little bit before. How have you sort of been able to triangulate or research that it was just a few weeks before the actual game in Japan, or the actual, product in Japan came out? How's that something that you've been able to figure out?
So lots of internet research, lots of looking up old texts, and lots of just reading old blog posts from old huge Pokemon collectors. The reason people are so precise now with the dates or as precise as they can get, is because Japanese history on Pokemon wasn't kept the best.
Mm.
So for one, it's really hard to look up old internet database searches on documents on these first Pokemon card sets. It's also hard to, when you're looking back in time, the Japanese language is if you're an English speaker, who are the majority, I would say, of collectors who are looking more into these older sets, or English speaking, you'd have to do a translation from Japan. So looking and trying to find historical documents from a time of not very good record keeping has been pretty difficult. And that's why it's almost taken 25 years in the hobby to really nail down which are these first sets.
Very cool. So what were you able to find specifically in these like blogs and documents and things? Was there like what were there like sort of key points in the research that allowed you to triangulate the date?
So the whole reason, or the whole thing that got me back into Pokemon card collecting, which is it's kind of funny to say now, but it's the whole Logan Paul boom. Once Logan Paul started showing cardboard Pokemon cards back from my childhood going for like 6 figures, I was like, what the heck? I gotta look into this. So the first thing I did when I like heard that these cards were going for 5 figures and 6 figures, the first thing I did was I researched what was the very first Pokemon card of all time. So this is back 2020, and this is the time that a card from this set, when it was thought to be the very first card set, sold for a new Pokemon high $500,000. Because at that time, people thought that there was a set, Topsun. People thought that cards that looked like this set right here. A lot of the Pokemon public, a lot of people who were kind of jumping onto the bandwagon, they all assumed that this was the very first card set, because if you look at the top, it says 1995 Topsun. But ever since then, and cards start selling in the 5 figures and 6 figures from this set, from people thinking that this was the first card set, people have done a lot more research and found out that this set right here, it actually was not released until 1997. So PSA made a mistake in making their label say this, and still to this day, it's not been corrected. It's not been changed back to 97. CGC's corrected it, BGS has corrected it, but still to this day, PSA hasn't corrected it. So that's what leads a lot of confusion still right now.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit, because I want to make sure that I understand, and I'm sure that most of the viewers understand, but just for my benefit. So the 1990, so the Topsun set is a set that a lot of people have described as being the first set, and of course they would. The card says 1995 on the PSA flip. The PSA graded copies of this card are easily the ones that sell for the most money, and so it's believed for a long time that it was from 1995. But what you're saying, and you're saying also that Beckett recognizes this, and CGC also recognizes this. This is actually not true. The Topsun set is not actually from 1995. What year is it from, and how do we know what year it's from?
So with the Topsun sets, no one has ever been able to locate exact release information as to what exact date, like we have with the trading card game stuff, or kind of like around what time period. But the clues that we've been given, which I would view as enough for me to say that this set released from 97, is two of the biggest clues. Is number one, on their own website. So if you go to Topsun or Topsika, they have kind of a timeline of their company. And so they admit and they've gotten a lot of questions from people in the public who collect this stuff. They've put on their timeline now that they did not even get a license to have anything Pokemon related until 97. So they didn't get their license from a company, Shogokukan, until the year 97. The other thing that people have done too is with these Topsun packs, they came 2 cards per pack, and every about 40 packs, you get a holographic on it. So in the back of those packs, they had a barcode. The way that I've read that Japan's culture would kind of categorize these barcodes is they're always in chronological order, time order. So
that makes sense.
Back at the barcodes, there's a rough idea that these Topsun products are most likely released in March of 97. So now people are not even debating if this is the 3rd Pokemon card set after Bandai Cardass and the trading card game, people are now starting to debate, is this the fourth Pokemon card set? Is this the fifth Pokemon card set? Without an exact date, there could be a lot of other Pokemon card sets released before even this one.
Super interesting. Okay, so why did PSA originally think it was 1995? Any thoughts on that?
I have my own theories on it. My guess is and this is no fault to PSA, because at the time these cards were not worth very much. Like a lot of the rarest cards in this set you could find for under $500 just like 2 years ago. So from going from $500 to $500,000, I don't think it was an error that they so meant to make. I think it was an honest mistake. But the reason that people, I believe, made this error is because at the very bottom of this, they do have the 1995 copyright timestamp that's on here. So from what I've heard, I don't think PSA was at fault in trying to, lead the public in a wrong direction. But I've heard that a lot of times they won't use the actual date that a set was released. What they'll do a lot of times is use the date that's on the card.
Yeah, the copyright date is as good of a date as you'll find on cards. It's the same thing in basketball cards or in sports cards. If the card has a copyright year on it, that year is as good as sort of gold in terms of what number is going to appear on the flip and how people think about it. So I think the question that I would ask is like, how in the world did Topsun end up putting 1995 on cards that didn't come out till 1997? My guess is that we'll never know on that. Do you have any theories on that?
Well, if you look at the different copyright dates that are on different cards, it not always will relate exactly with the times that they came out. So let me try and find an example.
Well, I have a pretty good example actually. And this is to the world of sports real quick. In the world of basketball cards, for a long time, Topps cards had both the original time to when Topps got the license to be able to create the cards. I think it's 1969. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's like, so you have cards from like 1975 that have two dates. They'll say 1969 and 1975. But if you have two dates, you know that it's the second one. I haven't seen too many cards where there's like one copyright and it's something from years ago, but I have to think maybe I have seen it. It's just not coming to my mind right now.
Yeah, actually, if you look back at the Bandai Cardass cards, like on the very top, they do have the 95 date at the top, the same exact one. But if you do look at the bottom, they actually put the 96 at the bottom as well.
Okay.
The other clue that I would use, though, in rebuttal to that question is in 1995, there weren't any other Pokemon products that were out. So I would find it very highly unlikely that a company that makes bubblegum is putting out cards before even the video game came out, before even there was a Pokemon hype. That's just how I see it. But
I wonder if the 95, and I know we're talking about a lot about the Topsun, so forgive me because that's not the main thing we're trying to talk about here. But I think that it's all part of it's all part of the detective work that you've done, and you're the subject expert on this, so it's exciting and interesting to hear from you on this. The 95 copyright might reference something as to the company, the Topsun company. Maybe that's when they gain the right. Maybe that's when the company started. Maybe that it could mean. Any other thoughts on what the 95 could mean?
One thought that I've had is that, and I don't know if I've heard any other collector theorize about this, but I kind of theorize if Bandai actually owned the rights to all the artwork behind the Topsun stuff and they actually sold it to Topsun after they released their cards. I sometimes wonder too if maybe these cards were submitted to Bandai first, even before the artworks were created for their original release, and they rejected it as something they didn't want to do, because there are little clues that kind of overlap between the first Bandai set and Topsun set. Whereas you look at this card, see what they've got in the background of this card. You see all those, it's like little Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Bandai card. So let me pull up a Topsun card. So if you look at the Topsun card, you see that same imagery right there.
Interesting.
But if you were to, I don't know, they both look pretty vintage, but a lot of people who study the artists say that it does appear like it could be the artwork behind these cards came out first. It could be.
the thing that is clear about this, and I think, again, I have to relate it to the world of sports cards. The thing that's really clear to me is that when cards originally start coming out, they're not viewed by the manufacturers in a lot of instances as potential works of art that are going to be worth thousands of dollars. And so what happens is a lot of times we have to do the research afterwards. And that is actually like, it's really interesting. It's really fun. And it like adds to how cool the thing is. Like, you love this set, but a huge part of why you love it, I think, is that you've been able to really like do the research on like why it is as significant as it is. And that's really like a fun, it's not just fun, that fun's the wrong word. It's like a really important part of the history. You've sort of set up the history of Pokemon cards for the rest of the community as you've done this. And that's really interesting. The example that I go to in my mind is there's a set in basketball cards that is called 1968 Topps Test. But what is certain is, as you look back at it, that PSA, when they originally labeled the card, or Beckett, whoever was originally sort of, the one that said what year the card should be, they labeled it as 68, 69. But it's clear looking at the players that are on the cards that it couldn't have been 68, 69. It had to be 67, 68. And so you fast forward all these years, this card, this like all the flips are wrong. The way that we talk about it's wrong. The way that like every part of it is wrong, but you can't go back in time and sort of change all of that. And so I know it's the 67 top set, but we're always going to call it the 68 set. And so what's interesting to me about the Topsun is now you have like a disagreement, it sounds like, between Beckett and CGC on one side and PSA on the other side. And you kind of wonder, where's it going to land? Like, are they going to land in the same place, or are they both going to dig in and just sort of say, this is what we believe? What would you like to see happen at this point?
I think what I would like to see happen, I think what a lot of people that are in this kind of vintage niche of the hobby would like to see happen, would just be for PSA just to start fixing their labels and making it say 1997. Because I have heard that, and I don't know which representatives at PSA, but I have heard that insiders at PSA have said now that they are aware that this Topsun set really did not come out until 97 and not 95. So I know there's people there. I just don't know if it's a work in progress now. And I think that's what would fix it. And I think honestly, that would help stabilize the market a little bit, because what we're seeing, or what we have seen over the past 2 years or so, or we're seeing a lot of people that have gotten really financially hurt kind of from the mislabeling from on the PSA cards. Because there's one guy that he bought what was thought at the time was a Pop 1 Topsun, and it was an error card too, because in the Topsun set, they have this particular error where they're called no number errors, where this number won't be here. There's only Pokemon that had it. So it was a Topsun no number blue back. So this was blue instead of green. Charizard, it sold for $500,000. And it was advertised as a Pop 1 from the very first set of all time. This is the 1995 Topsun Blueback no number Charizard. And then literally within a month, someone else graded a perfect 10, which is outrageous because this set suffers from insane centering issues. So it's blown my mind that even another one like that exists. They resold the card. It went from $500,000 to $200,000. That same cert number has just recently resold in a golden auction. I believe it was golden, maybe it was Heritage auctions, for around $30,000.
Yeah, it's tough. And this is why PSA is in a really tough spot on this, because once you've labeled a card as a certain year, to change it at that point sort of opens yourself up for liability, because people they're the experts, right? People have used the flips that say 1995 on it to say, hey, that's the first card. They've determined how they're going to buy the card based on that information. And so we're sort of left in this no-win situation. And so you can imagine like why PSA is sitting there going, oh, we don't want to correct that, because it opens them up to, at least if not liability, it certainly opens them up to, people sort of looking at it and saying, you were the expert, we're mad at you now. And so it's just a tough spot for everybody to be in. But I would agree with you. Like, it's really important to have a shared understanding at the beginning of any type of collectible, because if you don't have that shared understanding, then, and as long as there's this confusion, then it's just not going to be clear, and then the market's not really free to grow how it needs to. The market will only grow once there's the shared understanding. So with all of that said, that's a great background on the Topsun, and I'm sorry to belabor it all, but I really wanted to understand like how we can know that the Bandai Cardass set is the first one. And now that you sort of broken that down as to, you know, how we know Topsun came out when it came out, and the Bandai, can we call it, do some people just call it the Bandai set, or do people call it the Cardass set? Like, how do they?
Why do they just call it 96 Cardass?
96 Cardass. Okay. So with all that said, you've got these cards. They come out of a vending machine, which is so cool. Again, and it's reminiscent of early sports cards, because a lot of sports cards for a long time, like there were vending boxes. I don't know if you know this, but like there were vending boxes of vintage baseball. Or in the world of basketball, there's a brand called Prism from 1985, not with a Z, but with an S. And these cards came out of vending products. Is this the only way that people had to get these cards, was through vending machines? Because if so, I would guess that has made getting high grades exceptionally difficult.
Yes, it has. So to my knowledge, that is the only way that people have been able to get it. In the history of looking into this set, I've only seen one person ever crack a box for this set. And it was, so you'd have to think this would have to be a box that was never open, that was meant to go into one of those Carddass machines. I've only ever seen one open before, and I think the same collector has one from the very first set, one from the very second set, that kind of go hand in hand with each other. I've only seen that done one time, so extremely rare. Just like you're saying, because they do come out of those machines, you'll see on a lot of the cards that there will be like a little niche into the very side of the card. Like this one doesn't have it because this one's a perfect PSA 10, but you'll see on a lot of them, the reason they will be so many 8s and 9s is because there'll be like a big niche just into the side, and it's on so many of them. And with it being a full art that is a prism too, just any slight scratches can really mess it up. It's just such a hard card to preserve.
Super interesting. Yeah, I think there's two types of rarity, right? There's the rarity of the actual card, like the quantity that exists. And then there's the rarity of the card in a specific condition. And what you just highlighted here is, look, there's not a lot of the card in really good condition. My guess is that since they came out of these vending boxes, there's probably also not a huge quantity of the cards that are still around. Is that true as well?
I think that it's getting to be like that in high quality now, because now if you look for anything that's just raw and high quality, it's you just feel like you're spending hours searching online and not finding anything. But I know when I very first started collecting this set, and it wasn't really widely known that it was first, it wasn't too difficult, but I think the market has completely dried up with that. The other thing that kind of makes collecting the set, and especially in PSA 10s, difficult is if you look at the label that are on these, they don't differentiate whether the one graded as a green 10 or if it's a red 10. So when you look at the pop report, you kind of have to just roughly cut it in half and say, well, I guess there's probably just about as many green as there are red. So a lot of hunting down this set has an extra intricate detail that you have to look for. And I have noticed that it does seem to be about equal between green and red. I have seen a lot more green Moltres than I've seen red Moltres, and I've seen a lot more red Mewtwo's than I've seen green Mewtwo's. But for the most part, it seems pretty equally distributed. So most of the rare prisms in the set, they have pop counts in 10s between like 30 and 75. So I think this Mew has a pop of like 31. So you could roughly say there's probably about 15 or 16 of green and 15, 16 of the red.
Are you saying in a PSA 10 grade?
In a PSA 10 grade, yeah.
What like total population are we seeing across like all grades?
I'll have to check. I know that there's roughly been, I think, about 10,000 total cards graded
Oh, across the whole set.
across the whole set.
Very cool. Super cool. Yeah, I think you know, especially as you look at like you look this is super interesting around the grading and how they haven't labeled it red or green. In retrospect, again, it's a mistake. It's a mistake because there's a different variation that people are going to collect in different ways. And so, you know, whenever there is a different variation on something that is very clear, like it's upon the grader to then make a decision as to whether it gets lumped into the whole or it gets broken out. And obviously, as the market matures, you want it broken out because then the data becomes valuable. You may find, as you just described with Mewtwo, that like 10% of Mewtwo's are red and 90% are green, or vice versa. You might determine that by looking at the population report. But if you don't have that data, then what it really takes is like a lot of research and a lot of guesswork. And sometimes you do everything right, and then you realize, oh, you know, it was just during this 1-3 month span, a lot of this particular type came to auction for whatever reason. And sometimes you can end up making some correct assumptions. But that's what happens. I think we have a lot of instances, and I can point to a lot of them again in the world of sports cards, where PSA and the graders haven't done a great job of delineating between the different versions, and it's a problem. Do the other companies at this point, do they delineate, or they are all just sort of mixed in as well, like Beckett and CGC?
I know Beckett has had the hardest time out of everybody. They've probably changed their. I used to own probably 30 of these prisms from them, and I think there was like 8 different labels. Like they've had the most challenging time because it's one of the most challenging subjects to do a lot of deep research on, and it's almost like the more deeper down the hole you get, the more confusing you realize it is. So
what makes it confusing other than the colors that you described? Like that to me seems pretty easy. What's confusing about it?
I think what makes it confusing is, well, I think it's trying to nail down the date correctly.
Okay.
And something else that makes it confusing too is they came out. So when they first released this set, they did it in 2 parts. There's a green set and there's a red set. So green's part 1, red's part 2. But the really confusing part about it is green part 1, that actually is real. It actually has cards that are green and red in that set.
So and the green set has green and red cards.
It's in it, and the whole thing is to only go with the exact way that the Game Boy game was, because if you played Pokemon Red, there would be certain creatures that you could only get in Pokemon Red, or if you played Pokemon Blue, there'd be certain ones that you can only get in Pokemon Blue. But both styles of the card will be in both set. So green part 1 actually has both the green and the red Pikachu, whereas the later Pokemon in the Pokedex order will usually be part of the part 2 release. So Mewtwo and Mew will be part of the part 2 red set, okay, even though it is green and red.
Okay, so I misspoke about it not being confusing. You're right. So
when that detail makes it the most confusing too.
Well, yeah, it reminds me again, in sports cards in 2012, they came out with the Prism set. Ironically, we're talking about Prism. The Prism set, and the parallel to the regular card was the Prism. So if you pulled a really good card, it was called the quote Prism. And you just sort of look at it and go, why in the world would you name the parallel? It's kind of what you're talking about here. You've got a green set and a red set, but within the green set you have reds. But within the red, so the first set you said was the green set. Does that contain all of the characters?
So that would contain roughly half of the characters.
Okay.
And the red set was released in early October. What makes it even more confusing, has to add an extra wrinkle with this set, is the way that they released the time period of these being released were in a range, because it's the way that a lot of Japanese culture will do their dates. So when I say that I was released in late September, the way that they actually have it, and I've got I've actually got an old Koro book right here. This is a Japanese comic. This is what people have referenced for the release dates. Is if you look in here, they'll have the dates, and they will actually have very small right there. It will say, it will translate to between September 20th and September 30th.
Hmm.
And,
So
and I believe so then the second set, the red set that contained green and red, that was released in early October. So it was October 1st through the 10th.
So in September and October, when did the Japanese regular set come out?
The trading card game?
Yeah.
So the trading card game, that was released October 20th.
Oh, so it came out between the two.
No, it came out after.
Oh, I thought you said September and November.
No, September and October. If I said November, that I misspoke.
Oh, well, I probably misheard. I apologize. So they came out really close to each other, though. You've got both of the 96 card assets, and then you have right on the heels of both of those, you have the trading card game.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks for taking time to teach me this sort of stuff. Super interesting. We talked about so many parts of this that I think are really compelling because, again, the first of something matters, right? The first set matters. The first Topps baseball set matters. The first Prism basketball set, the first Exquisite basketball set, they matter. And here we are in 2022 making a video about all the complexities about which Pokemon card across the world was first. And I think that really matters. Like, I think it's really, really significant. So now that you've done a really good job of sort of walking us through from 1996 and 1997, all of these different Pokemon sets. And we really highlighted this Bandai Cardass set is the very first one. Like, the next thing I think that's important is to look at the set itself and talk about what components, and we've done on this a little bit, like talking about like what differentiates it and when, the reds came out versus the greens and the reds within the greens and that sort of thing. And we talked about the rarity. Let's talk a little bit about like the aesthetic of the cards, what you think about that, and why somebody might be interested in the card just from a purely aesthetic perspective.
I think, well, honestly, just the fact that when you hold one of these cards in your hand, say you're a Pokemon collector and say you only collect modern stuff, or say you only collect English stuff, you can't deny the feeling you get when you hold something that is truly the first from the very first card set of all time. So I think like for a lot of people that collect this set, it is to get that historical feel with collecting it for sure. As far as the aesthetic goes, I think a lot of people they gravitate a lot towards two different components of the set, which would be the prisms. For one, it's a challenge to grade them in such high grade.
Sure.
Just with it being a full art prism. What's cool is on the back too, you kind of get the old school Game Boy look as to like looking into your Pokedex. What does the card look like? What's the weight of the creature? What's some more information on it? And then, so people a lot of times will gravitate towards those prisms for the way they look, the old Game Boy kind of vibe to it. The other cards that people really like, actually, I just got this one out of my vault. It still has the PWCC sticker on it. But there's three cards. There's a Charizard, there's a Blastoise, and there's a Venusaur. And they are, there's three known as map cards, where on the back of the card, they'll have the town map. So it kind of gives you that nostalgic feeling of going back, playing that game for the first time, going to all the different little cities in the game. And then it has just I've got a Venusaur and Blastoise right here. That's kind of with the map cards. And even more than the prisms, these are even harder to grade. I actually don't have PSA 10 in these. And the reason being is they're, I think, less than 7 of all 3 of them in PSA 10 grade. And the problem is, as you can see, the centering on the back is not very good. This one was a 9. This one's not too awfully centered, but usually it'll be the bottom, I believe, that's a little fatter than the top. And it's just very obvious when you look at it as to the discrepancy there.
So there's map cards and there's prism cards. Is there anything else that's part of the card asset that people should know about?
Okay, so there are the 3 map cards that people go crazy over. Then there is 12 prisms, and there's 12 prisms in green and red, so that accounts for 24 cards of the set. And then there are 4 checklist cards. So if you ever get confused as to which one is part of the part one green set, they have two green checklist cards that will show you every card that's in that first part one set, and then they have two checklist cards that will go over the red set too.
Very cool. Well,
Some people like that because it's like the Pokedex. It just feels like you're holding on to the old Pokedex. It's neat.
I always sort of like look at a market and try to figure out why things are priced the way they are. And what I've learned in my 30 plus years in the hobby is oftentimes things don't make a whole lot of sense. Things are not always totally rational. And so, you know, when you think about the main Charizard map card from the very first Pokemon set being as limited as it is, you know, that's rarer than the Pikachu Illustrator. That's rarer than the Charizard in a BGS 10. You know, that those are cards that at least in the illustrators, at least for that one, it's $1 million plus card in some grades. And you know, if we were to see a Charizard 10 sell, I don't know how long it's been since we've seen one, but it's just a huge card. How does the Charizard map card, if you had to guess, and I get that one hasn't moved in at least 5 years, I get it. If you had to guess at how like it compares in terms of like the price and the hierarchy of those other cards, where do you think it fits? And then I've got a follow-up question after you answer that.
So when I think about that particular card, the map card, I think it would probably go for about 50,000 or more. And the reason being is because, and the reason that collecting these prisms has been so challenging for me as a collector is because there are a ton of Pokemon collectors out there that will only collect one particular Pokemon.
Yep.
So there's an Alakazam collector and say they want to get the Alakazam in green or red and PSA 10. Well, then there's two that will never be on the market again. Yep. And it's only exacerbated with the Charizard. So the Charizard map card, I think that's a future 6-figure card for sure. And I think that as far as the prisms go, I think that the red Charizard and the green Charizard Prism, I think both of those I think that they're going to start, we'll see it hit the 20K range and it will start going up towards 6 figures itself. And the pop on those is roughly, I think 76 right now.
What people say a lot of times is they say that card checks a lot of boxes. And what I think that means in some cases is like there's different types of collectors that want them. What you've just really highlighted is that there are set collectors and there are, like, I guess for lack of a better term, character collectors that both need these cards. And because they're so low in terms of total population, but especially at the top, you know, in the 9s and the 10s, like you don't see them sell, which sort of the thing that like that makes my mind go to is from my perspective, again, just a sports card guy, I'm not a Pokemon guy. There's a lot of things I don't know about this, so take it for what it's worth. But if the very first Charizard, there's like you said between 2 and 7 in a PSA 10, if that's roughly worth, you know, 20% as much as like a PSA 10 that's a first edition shadowless or whatever, like I don't understand how those two ideas sort of corroborate. I don't understand how that makes sense, because the rare thing that's also the first thing in my mind should be in the same ballpark as the later thing. Even though the later thing's like iconic and recognizable and everybody knows about it, like it's coming up on our iconic 100 countdown that we're doing right now too. Like everybody knows about this card. I get it. I get all of that. But like at the end of the day, collectors want to own the really rare thing. They want to own the thing that's the first thing. Like, how is it that it's worth a fraction of what the other one's worth? Do you think that stands as time goes on, or do you think that'll change?
I think for the time being, I think right now the biggest thing that's kind of hurting this Bandai Cardass set is the very black cloud that is Topsun and its fall from graces from everyone who follows the Pokemon card market. They saw that $500,000 sell and they saw it tumble all the way down to $30,000.
Yeah.
I think right now with PSA not correcting the label, because if you look at Bandai Cardass prices over the past 2 years, they have gone up. Like my investment has probably gone up double, maybe triple, some pieces quadruple, but it's not 10x. It's not skyrocketed. And I think the reason being is because of there's not a lot of trust in the community still, even with people like me who love to look at the exact documents as to these were the dates that they came out. This is the evidence we got. There's just not a lot of trust in the community right now because people have already been misled off a cliff once. So I think until bigger companies can kind of look at the evidence themselves or be presented it and kind of make a more firm stance on it, I think that's what's preventing it. So I think the next 5 years, I think we'll start to see a major correction. I think over the next 2 years, you still have quite a bit of time to, get as many of the 9s or 10s as you want while they're still in reasonable ranges. Because once, and there will be people in the hobby that would be mad at me for even coming out and doing a video like this, because a lot of it is hush hush. Like you don't want to be like, if there's not many big collectors, a lot of the big collectors would say, "Oh man, come on, I'm not done buying my set yet. I'm still hunting these. These are hard." So, they don't like publicity to the set until
for sure
they've got theirs.
Education is kind of a funny thing. You don't know when it's going to come, and you don't know when people are going to grab onto it. You don't know when a video is going to be viewed thousands of times, or if it's just going to get viewed a few hundred times, and you don't know how people are going to sort of like convert to those ideas. The thing that's really clear to me on the pricing question is that, and I talk about this a lot, there's a lot of times there's multiple variables. And, if we go back to our algebra class from when we were in school, like having one variable is really easy. You can figure out with one variable with an equation, like what that variable is worth. But when you have multiple, there's sometimes some like the math is a lot harder. Sometimes you can't figure out, what the answer for sure is. You can figure out what a set of answers are. This situation where the where we have this black cloud that you've described is a massive variable, but so is this idea of being educated. And if the whole market was suddenly perfectly educated on these things, I believe you've convinced me at least that the world of how people collect these cards would be really different. And so, what I would just say to you is like, thank you for taking the time today to walk me and everybody who's listening to this through what really has happened over the course, over that course of that very important 96 to 97 era of these cards. And I think what'll be really interesting to do, Max, is like, let's look back in a year. Let's look back in 2 and 3 and 4 years, and let's see how people, either took sort of this information and, the other variables and sort of like process them. Let's see if it does lead to more people collecting. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes it never makes sense. It never comes back around, and the wrong things or the right things never get hyped, and things never change in terms of values. So let's see what happens with that. But before we go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time today to walk us through all this stuff. I'm really grateful for it. Again, Max City on Instagram, great follow, and everything that you want to know about this stuff. And is there anything that you want to add before we go?
No, I just want to say I'm honored and thank you guys for the opportunity at PWCC for letting me have some space today to go over these vintage sets, because there's a lot of people online that will, cover little bits and pieces, but it will be very wholesome to be able to point towards a video to, have some more details on it. So I'm honored to be a part of the platform with you guys. And that was awesome. I'm down too. Yeah, let's do it a year or 2 years or whenever you want to do it. I'm down.
We'll put it on the calendar, man. Hey, show off your bling one more time. I want to see that one more time.
Yeah, right there.
I love it. That's so cool. And you last thing for me, you've got like most of the set, right? Like, what do you have left to sort of finish the whole thing off?
So in the prisms, it's to my knowledge that nobody has ever collected all 12 red and all 12 green prisms. And I think before me, I don't think anyone had collected all of one color before in PSA 10 grade. And so in the PSA 10 grade, I now have finished my red set. I'm number 1 on the set registry with that. I've got 11 of the 12 pieces of the green set. The only piece I need is the green Charizard, which I've got 3 on the radar right now. But, not everybody who has those, and especially with everything I just laid out, do they want to sell it so easily. So we're working out price negotiations and going from there.
The great irony of card collecting is that when you really want something, you tell the whole world about it and you tell them why, and then they decide, I don't want to sell that to you because I see it as being as cool as cool as it is. I had a card like that earlier this year. I literally 5x the value of a specific card that I had to go out and find, because there's only a few of them in existence and none of the people who own them were willing to sell it to me. So I hope we didn't accidentally just 5x the value of the Charizard that you're trying so hard to look up. But that's the nature of rare collectibles, right? You've got to find somebody who's willing to sell it. You say you found 3 people, but how many are in the whole population?
I believe there's 76 right now. So that's roughly 30, what is that? 36 or so of the green.
Yeah, 38 greens, 38 reds. And
yeah, that's better math than I did.
I'm a CPA. I'm pretty good at splitting things in half. But no, I mean, you're talking about 38 cards, one of the most important Charizards that, again, I just totally like talked about, like why it would be so cool to own that specific card. Like, of course you can't find it. Of course nobody wants to sell it. Like, I'm sorry, but like I get why they're not selling it to you, because even though you need it more than anybody else needs it, like it's such a critically important card in such a low population. Anyway, we've gone on longer than we wanted to. Max, you are awesome. Thanks for joining us. And listeners, until next time, happy collecting.